In our last episode, we retrieved a rogue synth from the Raider compound at Libertalia after Madison Lee put a courser chip on our Pip-Boy, allowing us to use the synth relay. Now Father wants to talk to us about something else, but there's still a lot of secrets to uncover here in the Institute. While we were exploring bioscience, after first arriving at the Institute, we found a locked door to the FEV lab. Now, we learned from a terminal in Father's quarters that the FEV lab was offline. And we learned from the terminal entries in Advanced Systems that something dramatic happened at the FEV lab, and Father won't tell anyone about it. Or at least he won't tell Madison Lee about it. And then, after reading Dr. Volkert's terminal, we read that he treated a patient who sustained blunt force trauma injuries in the FEV lab. What exactly went on here? To find out, we need to head back to bioscience and unlock the novice-locked door to enter the FEV lab. Sweet. We arrive in a small hallway guarded with a laser tripwire. Immediately we see that the FEV lab is not updated. It doesn't look like the rest of the Institute. It looks like a pre-war lab, which means that this must have been part of the original Commonwealth Institute of Technology before the bombs dropped. At any rate, this is clearly one of the oldest labs in the Institute. After disarming the tripwire, we arrive at a decontamination arch. Looking up, we see the tripwire was connected to a Tesla arc trap. Good thing we bypassed that. Moving through, we find the body of a synth on the ground before us. And turning left, we see two doors. The left one is locked with a novice lock, which we can pick. And inside, we find two buttons. Pressing the right one closes the door, leading back out to the Institute. Pressing the left one closes the door that leads to the FEV lab. There are a few containers in here, including an ammo box on a shelf and a first aid kit on a wall. That's it for this room, so back to the hallway, we can open the southern door. Turning right, we can peer through this door to find a ceiling-mounted turret. Moving into this room, we find two more turrets at the end of this hall. The shelf in here is covered in Wonder Glue and pre-war food. There's a closet here with even more pre-war food inside. Sugar bombs and cram.
Standing down.
Oh, great. That is the unmistakable sound of a nearby Assaultron. The door at the end of this hall is locked by a novice-locked terminal. After hacking the terminal, we find turret control and door control. I went ahead and turned off any turrets, just in case this was connected to any I hadn't already destroyed, and then we can open the door. Moving inside, we find a huge storage room. There are bottle caps scattered atop a nearby reception desk, and behind us is a med kit on a shelf. Randomly, there's a puncturing pipe wrench mod lying on a nearby shelf next to a toolbox. And moving into storage, we find the Assaultron.
Engaging the human.
That Assaultron was not messing around. After it's finally destroyed, we can move back into the storage room and explore. We see cans of paint next to a red toolbox. At the bottom of one shelf, there is another hooked pipe wrench mod. On another shelf, we find a large toolbox on one shelf, a duffel bag on the ground next to another toolbox on another shelf, and more pre-war food covering these shelves. Lots of dog food and sugar bombs. When the storage room is explored, we can pass through the door where we killed the Assaultron. This leads to a hallway flanked by doors on either side. In the first door to the left, more toolboxes, more paint cans, and more pre-war dog food. Turning around, we can open the door directly across the hall. It's locked with a novice lock. Inside, we find a bunch of lockers filled with Institute gear, lab coats, courser uniforms. Interestingly, all the lab coats here aren't black, which means they are synth retention lab coats. Not sure why these would be in bioscience. On the wall next to the door is a medkit. Moving out to the hallway, we can turn south, whereupon we find bodies on the ground. Cat bodies. The ground is covered in cat corpses. What? There are no fewer than 3 dead cats lying here, one of which has a bottle cap. There's another dead synth here, but it's then that we alert some nearby turrets. Ooh, sneaky. They're hiding. The turret's dead, we can move forward to find a cross-section with 4 small cells. One cell has an open door. Inside is a chessboard. The cell across from it is locked with a novice lock. Inside is a dead super mutant with a dead cat and a couple of toys, a truck and a race car. Moving across the hall. Oh, missed a turret here. 2 in the next room. Back to these other cells, one is locked, and it's an advanced lock. I couldn't pick it, but if we could, inside we find more cat meat and a kickball. Turning around, we can open this last cell door, and inside we find toy blocks. Into the main hallway, we find another laser tripwire. It's tricky. To disarm it, we have to jump up on this metal canister and activate it from above. We see that this tripwire was connected to another Tesla arc trap in the ceiling above. This puts us in a large square room with a dead synth draped over a tipped over shelf. How did all of this furniture get toppled over? And who killed all these synths? In the eastern wall is another supply closet with more food and science equipment on the shelf. Turning around, we find a door that requires a terminal, which is locked with a novice lock. After hacking the terminal, we find turret control. We can deactivate any connected turrets, and then we can open the door. Moving forward, we find another terminal on the other side of this door. This just controls the door. And then rounding a corner in a hallway bathed in red light, we can open a door to enter the FEV lab. We see 3 tubes filled with fluid in the middle of the room. And 2 of the tubes have super mutants floating inside. One of the tubes is broken, and there's glass all over the floor. This is a circular lab, and there are tables everywhere. Moving counterclockwise first, we find a console by one of the tubes with a holotape on top. FEV Research Notes.
This is Dr. Elliott with the official report for the Directorate from Bioscience. The date is, August 2178. I'm pleased to report that, as has been the case during my tenure, crop yields exceed expectations. In point of fact, everything down here is fine, with one notable exception. Dr. Frederick has informed me that the Directorate has pre-approved research on samples of the FEV virus, which he already has in his possession. Now, I'm not one to question the Directorate, you all know that. I don't even want to know where this came from, but, well, this is troubling. Dangerous, possibly. I will do my best to make sure risks are minimized, but I really do hope that the consequences are understood.
So the Institute began experimenting with FEV in 2178, 109 years ago, 12 years after the events of Fallout 1, 2 years before the Minutemen formed in the Commonwealth. It sounds like one scientist objected to the Institute experimenting with FEV, but clearly he was ignored. Taking a closer look at the broken tube, we see that a chair has been thrown into it. That's how it broke. Whatever super mutant was in this tube is gone. Could Virgil have been in this tube? Turning around, we find a terminal, and lying next to it is the holotape. Brian Virgil, personal log 0176.
Personal record, Dr. Brian Virgil. This will likely be my last recording. My requests to shut down the FEV program have repeatedly been denied. We've learned nothing useful in the last 10 years. Why does Father insist on continuing it? If he won't see reason, then I have to take matters into my own hands. What we're doing, it's not right. It needs to stop. If anyone should find this after I'm gone, know that I never wanted to hurt anyone. Anyone. Do you understand me? I'm gonna make sure the whole program is shut down. If not for good, then at least for years to come. After that, I know what I'm about to do will be seen as a betrayal. Treason, he'll probably call it. So, I'm leaving. I have a plan, and if it works, I'll be somewhere safe. Somewhere not even the coursers can find me. Everything that we've done, the lives we've taken. If there is a God, may he have mercy on us all.
So this was Virgil's lab. Virgil chose to destroy this program and to flee the Institute for ethical reasons. What we are doing, it's not right, he said. He mentioned the lives that they had taken. And even though the Institute began experimenting with FEV 109 years ago, Virgil mentions Father by name. Despite this research providing nothing of use for the past 10 years, Father, Sean, refused to shut down the program. Turning around, we can read the terminal. Project Synthesis Terminal 1A, project status indefinite suspension. Director Override AZ-77. In the first, subject status, we find 7 entries. In the first, subject male 151, baseline male mid-30s, poor overall health, post-submersion results consistent with standard results, subject status discarded. Not killed, not incinerated, discarded. In the next one, female 224, baseline female, late 30s, moderate overall health. Post-submersion results, initially consistent with standard results, rapid decline in physical condition. Subject status, deceased. In the next one, subject M153, baseline male, early 30s, moderate overall health. Post-submersion results, physical condition consistent with standard results. Mental acuity, charting slightly higher than average. Subject status, tagged and discarded. Tagged and discarded? The only reason to tag a supermutant is to track that supermutant. In the next one, subject male 092, baseline male late 20s, above average overall health. Post-submersion results, rapid decline in mental capacity, anomalous physical results. Subject status terminated. Alright, so if a subject is deceased, they likely died during the procedure. If terminated, the Institute killed them because they were too dangerous or unworthy of future experimentation. In the next one, subject female 199, baseline female early 20s, moderate overall health, post-submersion results, rapid excessive physical growth, aggression far above normal parameters. Subject status terminated. In the next one, subject male 187, baseline male mid-30s, poor overall health, post-submersion results inconclusive, subject status terminated. Note, subject unintentionally terminated during incident V. V for Virgil. Data should be culled from future reports. As Virgil tried to escape the Institute, he wreaked havoc on the FEV lab. Perhaps this is one of the supermutant bodies we see floating in one of the tubes. Maybe when Virgil tore this place up, the FEV lab's life support system for the mutants floating in the tubes got destroyed, which led to their termination. In the last one, subject female 203, baseline female early 30s, moderate overall health, post-submersion results inconclusive, subject status terminated. Note, subject unintentionally terminated during incident V. Data should be culled from future reports. Perhaps this is the other mutant floating in one of the tubes. It would make sense. 2 mutants terminated by accident after Virgil escaped, 2 mutant bodies left floating in the tubes. Backing out of subject status, we can move on to progress reports. Here we find 4 entries. In the first, July 10th, 2277, a decade before the events of Fallout 4, 1 month before the Lone Wanderer emerges from Vault 101 during the events of Fallout 3. Entered by C. Syverson. Notes, Latest round of testing complete. Results are all within expected parameters. Informed Dr. Zimmer directly, as he had ordered the tests personally. He seemed annoyed with the results, unsure what he was looking for. He declined to specify why he wanted the tests run to begin with. Dr. Zimmer? Dr. Zimmer is in charge of SRB, synth retention. Why would an experiment taking place in bioscience report to Dr. Zimmer? We learned in the first holotape that 109 years ago, the FEV lab was still under the bioscience umbrella. Dr. Elliott first started talking about crop yields before expressing his concerns about the directorate's intention to start working with FEV. Sounds like at some point within those 109 years, oversight for the FEV program moved from bioscience to synth retention, which may help explain all of the coarser uniforms and black lab coats we found in the lockers upon entering the FEV lab. Also, we learned from the events of Fallout 3 that Dr. Zimmer must have left the Institute right after this entry was written, because a month later he was found in the Capital Wasteland, looking for his missing android at Rivet City. And the next one, April 10th, 2286, just over a year ago. Entered by Brian Virgil. Notes: I have officially assumed the lead role on the project after Dr. Syverson's passing. Latest round of subjects show results similar to previous test runs over last 5 years. No statistical deviation noted. Synthetic organics continue to perform well. The necessity of further tests is unexplained. And here we find some clues as to why the Institute was experimenting with FEV to begin with. If the synthetics organics experiment fulfills the purpose of the FEV experiment, and synthetic organics created the synth, which is the perfect human, we can assume that the Institute began experimenting with FEV for the same reason, to perfect humanity. They couldn't create a human that was immune to disease, the super soldier, and obedient to the Institute with FEV, but they could create a person immune to disease that was a super soldier and obedient to the Institute with the synth program. And yet Father still refused to cancel this program. In the next one, February 10th, 2287, this year. Entered by Brian Virgil. Notes: nothing new. Always the same. Have entered formal complaint with Directorate. These tests are not bringing in any valuable information. The Organics project was spun off decades ago. Why do we insist on continuing this? Next, we can read Redacted. Entered by Director Override AZ99. Notes: redacted. All inquiries about this project should now go straight to the Director. The lab will be offline until further notice. Looks like Virgil may have written a farewell note here, or perhaps this was his formal complaint, but Father redacted it. Backing out of the terminal, we continue to explore counterclockwise, and we see more evidence of Brian Virgil's violent altercation here all around us. Tipped over tables, science equipment scattered around, shelves completely knocked over. On top of another bank of consoles, we find another holotape, also named FEV Research Notes.
This is Dr. Elliott reporting for the Bioscience Division, March 22-24. We just received another batch of subjects, but as my previous report stated, we're at an impasse here. More of the same won't help. The two most promising strains of FEV have been adapted to an ideal state, but we're still missing something. I am officially echoing the team's position. The most likely progress for our research on synthetic organics requires new avenues of exploration. Additional Commonwealth subjects will not help. It's the same problem across the board: exposure to too much radiation. We need someone new. There's a proposal we'll be putting forward. I am not entirely comfortable with it, but it seems the best course.
2224 was 3 years before Kellogg arrived at Vault 111 to kidnap Sean. Here we learned that their research into FEV was ultimately to support their research into synthetic organics. They were trying to use FEV to perfect a human's genetic code that they can then use as a foundation for creating a perfect synthetic superhuman. But Commonwealth subjects, whom they were experimenting on, had been exposed to too much radiation, producing super mutants the Institute couldn't control. producing genetic samples that were so corrupted they couldn't be incorporated into a synthetic super being. It's the exact same problem that the Master had. It's the reason the Master was trying to get into Vault 13.
The FEV was mutated by the war radiation. Those living in this desolate wasteland have been exposed to this mutant FEV, essentially inoculating them from the full effects.
He needed pre-war people who had not been exposed to radiation so that he could dunk them in tanks of FEV to create intelligent supermutants. But the Institute couldn't find any pre-war people who had never been exposed to radiation, which is why all of their experiments produced stupid, lumbering supermutant brutes. The proposal that Dr. Elliot gave to the Institute was to raid a vault to look for pre-war people who had not been exposed to mutant FEV in the Earth's atmosphere, corrupted by nuclear radiation, so that they could perform experiments with their perfected strains of FEV on people who essentially had not already been inoculated to FEV. Perhaps even here, he was proposing to kidnap a baby, which is why he wasn't entirely comfortable with it.
The Institute endeavored to create synthetic organics. The most logical starting point, of course, was human DNA. Plenty of that was available, of course, but it had all become corrupted. In this wasteland, radiation affected everyone. But then the Institute found me after discovering records from Vault 111. An infant, frozen in time, protected from the radiation-induced mutations that had crept into every other human cell in the Commonwealth.
But they got their sample. Presumably, they then took a sample of Sean's genetic material and exposed that sample to one of their 2 perfected strains of FEV. This then perfected Sean's genetic code, which they then used as a foundation for the Gen 3 synth. With the genetic code now perfected, they spun the synthetic organics program off from the FEV program, now undertaken by its own department, the robotics department, making all of this continued research into FEV redundant. After scouring the FEV lab for further clues, at last we stumble upon an experimental serum. This is what Virgil sent us to find. This is what he can use to hopefully cure himself. This, amazingly, is a cure for FEV, a virus that no one has been able to cure during all of Fallout's history. And at last, we discover what the Institute is doing with their kidnapped victims. Kidnapped victims like the real Roger Warwick. We learned while reading the bioscience terminals that he was kidnapped and interviewed and replaced with a synth. But what happened to the original Roger Warwick? Was he simply killed? Probably not. He was probably sent here, like all of the other kidnapped victims. All of the other people who had been replaced in the Commonwealth, sent here to be experimented on with FEV. And we learned that the Institute is responsible for the existence of supermutants in the Commonwealth. There's no Mariposa military base here, no great vats of FEV just lying about in a big abandoned military structure that people can stumble upon. There's no Vault 87 here in the Commonwealth. No vault where Vault-Tec scientists were experimenting with FEV that supermutants could later take over and use as a base to turn more people into supermutants. None of that is in the Commonwealth, but the Institute is in the Commonwealth. The Institute was kidnapping people and turning them into supermutants. The Institute was then tagging them and discarding them, sending them back out into the Commonwealth. Every supermutant we have fought and killed in the Commonwealth was once an experiment here in the Institute that has since been released. The supermutants that the people of the Commonwealth are fighting and being killed by are their very own neighbors, fathers, mothers, brothers, sisters, family members who had been kidnapped by the Institute and replaced with synths. This is a hard thing to understand after Father just sent us on a quest to recapture one rogue synth for fear of what that synth could do to people in the Commonwealth. How could the same man who refused to end the FEV program which was sending super mutants out into the Commonwealth, be the same man who wants us to capture a rogue synth? How could this be the same man who assured us when we arrived at the Institute that the people of the Commonwealth have nothing to fear from the Institute?
Ultimately, the Commonwealth has nothing to fear from us, whatever you've seen or heard.
After turning the FEV lab upside down, we don't find any further lore. However, we do find a door to the east. Heading through, we find a door leading back to bioscience. We arrive in a room barred off by a laser grid, similar to the one we saw in advanced systems. To get through this grid, we activate a nearby FEV lab entry terminal. The FEV laboratory is a potential biohazard area and has been sealed. Access to this section of the facility is prohibited. Requests for more information can be sent in triplicate to our records department. Maybe that's why Madison Lee didn't get any answers. Maybe she only sent 1 or 2 requests for information. At any rate, here we find an option to disable the laser grid. And with that, we return to the bioscience department. This makes me wonder how Virgil escaped. Piecing together everything that we've seen, Brian Virgil was fed up with the unethical experiments that the Institute was doing to people of the Commonwealth, kidnapping them, infecting them with FEV, experimenting on the resulting supermutants, giving them children's toys and cats to play with, feeding them sugar bombs and dog food to see how they react, then tagging them and releasing them to the Commonwealth. Father repeatedly refused to end the FEV program, and so Brian Virgil felt like he had no other options. He had to do something. He infected himself with FEV. He turned into a supermutant and trashed the FEV lab. The Institute responded in force, killing a couple of other supermutants during the fracas, and Brian Virgil injured another scientist. But then he somehow escaped. We found no way out of the Institute in the FEV lab. The only other door we found led to bioscience, but from here there's no way out. Repeatedly, the people of the Institute say that the only way in and out of the Institute is by using the relay. And yet, somehow, Brian Virgil found a way out. And so have a bunch of synths. Remember, synths have been escaping the Institute. How? Dr. Io seems to think that someone in the Institute must be responsible, but if the relay is the only way in and out of the Institute, how did those synths escape? How did Brian Virgil escape? Either the people of the Institute are keeping something from us, or maybe they don't know about another way in and out. A way that Brian Virgil must have discovered. With Virgil's serum in our possession, and now that we have the Courser chip installed on our Pip-Boy, we can fast travel out of the Institute and head back to the glowing sea. After all, we made an agreement with Virgil. He helped us with the signal interceptor. We've got to fulfill our end of the bargain. Heading inside Virgil's lab, we find him anxiously waiting for us.
Well, I'm glad to see the relay didn't completely vaporize you.
Did you expect it to?
No, of course not. It was far more likely that it would just blow up. But it didn't. You made it in. Were you able to find the serum?
It did, but I pulled myself together.
I suppose you did. Now, what about the serum? Did you find it?
Damn thing almost killed me.
I did warn you. I'm surprised it worked at all. Now, what about the serum? Did you get the serum?
The interceptor worked. It was rough, but it worked.
Amazing. And what about the serum? Did you find the serum?
What serum?
We had a deal. I help you get into the Institute. You find the cure that I was working on. It should still be in my old lab, in the bioscience division. With any luck, they haven't found it yet. Volkert probably still has the place sealed up while he goes through my research.
Now we could renege on our deal and tell him that we're not looking for that serum anymore.
I'm not wasting any more time on this.
After everything I've done for you, you're just going to leave me like this? No! No!
In which case, he and his robots all turn hostile. If we haven't found the serum, we can tell him we're still looking.
I'm still looking for it.
It should be in my old lab, in the bioscience division. Please, hurry.
But if we have found the serum, we have two options. We could give it to him, or we could try to pass a yellow charisma check to convince him that we can't find it. If we fail...
I can't find it anywhere. I'm sorry.
What? No. You must have just missed it. Keep trying. Search the rest of the labs. Turn the whole damn institute inside out. It has to be there somewhere. It has to.
But if we succeed...
What? No. It has to be there. Unless... Volkert. Damn it. The old man always hated my work. But if he ordered it all destroyed, he wouldn't have even known. What am I gonna do? Am I stuck like this?
It's interesting that he keeps mentioning Volkert. He must be talking about Dean Volkert, because Brendan is too young. Dean Volkert is the doctor of the Institute. He's not in charge of the bioscience division. That would be Clayton Holdren. Dr. Volkert is more interested in hydroponics, in the health of the people of the Institute and their nutrition needs. It's strange that he and not Clayton Holdren would be the guy thumbing through Virgil's notes. But anyway, I digress.
Could you make the serum here?
Here? With this junk? I've got no notes, no samples, nothing.
At least you're free.
Yes. Well, free to be a monster. Free to be hunted anywhere I go. Free to cower in this wretched cave. Not much of a life.
How many people did you infect with FEV for your research? You only got what you deserved.
What? How can you say that? After everything I've done for you.
In which case, he and his robots all turn hostile. Pretty cruel thing for the sole survivor to say, considering Virgil is out here, banished from the Institute, because he objected to what was going on in the FEV lab. Or we could pass an orange charisma check to say,
What about the virus? Won't your condition get worse over time?
No. My mutations have stabilized. I should be all right.
but if we pass it...
I don't know. God, what if you're right? Could I end up like those dumb brutes? No, I couldn't live like that.
We find 3 options and a red charisma check. However, we get a special option in this previous dialogue tree if we've visited Swan's Pond and if we've read all of Swan's notes. It's easy to miss one of the notes. There are 4 of them, and they're all hidden in different places inside Swan's shack. But all 4 notes tell us the story of Edgar Swan, a story I covered in my lore video on Edgar Swan that you can watch here. But the short version is that Edgar Swan was a former Institute scientist who was caught stealing cigarettes. Which is bizarre because, as we learned in my video where we explored the Institute, there are cigarettes absolutely everywhere. These scientists really love to smoke. At any rate, he was put on trial, and for a punishment, he was infected with FEV. That's right, Swan in Swan's Pond was a former Institute scientist, not someone kidnapped from the Commonwealth. He was infected with FEV and then discarded like every other super mutant in the Commonwealth. If we've read all of Swan's notes, we find an option here to ask Virgil if he remembers Swan.
Do you remember Edgar Swan?
Swan. Yes, I saw his file. He was one of our first test subjects, years ago. His mutations destabilized, started turning into a behemoth. You think that could happen to me? Maybe I'm fine for a few months, a few years, but... God, I couldn't live like that.
And this puts us into the same dialogue tree, only the red charisma check is now an easier orange.
What are you going to do now?
I could.
Maybe it won't come to that. I'm sorry. I don't know what to say.
No, the serum is my only hope. Please, go back. Just one more time. It has to be there somewhere. It has to.
Or we could pass a red charisma check that, remember, is orange if we read Swan's notes to convince him to commit suicide. If we fail...
Then end it now, while you can still make that choice.
What? No! 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 You're lying! Oh, and I almost fell for it. Damn it! Damn you!
He turns hostile. But if we succeed...
I don't think I can. I don't have the stomach to kill myself. But you could do it. Go ahead. Just try to make it quick, all right? All right. Whenever you're ready.
He can't commit suicide. Instead, he asks us to kill him. If we back away, try to get out of this situation, he turns hostile. So, our best bet at this point is to kill him. On his body, we find Virgil's rifle. It has the Mutant Slayer legendary effect, dealing 50% more damage against super mutants. And it has standard mods equipped, so it will need to be upgraded. Or we could fulfill our promise and give him the serum.
Got it right here.
That's it. That's really it. All right. Let's see. Retrovirus has matured nicely. Density gradient is high. Recombinant counter-intron sequences look stable. Transcriptive exon strands have formed.
Has the reverse transcriptase survived the nucleotide synthesis?
Excellent question. Yes, it has. Fascinating. Oh, did you mean that as a joke? Well, it's time. There's only one way to test it.
How are you going to test it?
On myself, of course. That was the plan. This serum will only counteract the specific strain of FEV that I infected myself with. There's no telling what it might do to anyone else.
So it's good.
There's only one way to find out.
That's good.
It is. But there's only one way to know if it works. All right. Here we go. And now, we wait.
That's it?
What? Did you expect me to transform right before your eyes? This is science, not a two-cap magic show.
How long will it take?
I don't know. Nothing like this has ever been tried before.
It didn't work.
Give it time. The retrovirus has to run its course.
It'll work. Don't worry.
I hope so. We just have to let the retrovirus run its course. I'm going to rest for a while. I'm back in a few days, maybe a week, and... well, I guess we'll see. In any event, you kept your end of our bargain. Thank you.
And with Virgil's heartfelt thanks, it's now time to wait to see if it works. He said we needed to wait a couple of days, or a week. Specifically, we need to wait exactly 3 days. 3 days later, we get an alert on our Pip-Boy to go check in on Virgil. And upon arrival back at Virgil's cave, we find a man standing at Virgil's terminal.
Welcome back. It needs some refinement, but I think we can consider my serum a qualified success.
This is a qualified success?
There were some side effects to the process. I seem to have hair again, and I've retained some muscle mass. The genetic resequencer needs more work. Still, I take your point. This is a significant advance, but only for one strain of FEV.
I'm just glad you're human again.
As am I. Though I still have a tremendous amount of work to do.
I kept my part of the bargain.
So you did. And I'm deeply grateful.
This is incredible.
It is a significant first step, but it still only works on one strain of FEV. It will take years, perhaps decades, to generalize my formula. Still, you have my gratitude. You're welcome to make use of my lab. Or help yourself to any of this junk, if you want it. In the meantime, I have a lot of experiments to run, Excuse me.
Well, that Virgil goes back to his experiments, which is odd because he told us when we first met him that he didn't have the lab equipment necessary to continue working on his serum. But looks like now in his human body, he's able to get it all to work. Now everything in his cave that was previously red and set to owned is green, and we can loot whatever we want. He doesn't have any new terminal entries. We can loot a lot of super mutant armor that he has lying around if we have a super mutant companion like Strong, and we can loot the end of dungeon steamer trunk down by his bed. But we don't get Virgil's rifle. This is it. This is our reward. The only way to get the rifle is by killing him. Once done, Virgil has little else to say.
Virgil.
Did you need something? Make yourself at home. Such as it is. Sorry, I'm rather busy right now.
We find no way to tell Father or anyone at the Institute where Virgil is. We recall from Kellogg's memories that Virgil was now the Institute's public enemy #1. Kellogg's next mission was to go find Virgil, but apparently that is no longer a priority. Not even X688, who told Kellogg about Virgil, seems to care about him now. What's interesting is he's wearing a blue Institute lab coat here. Blue is for advanced systems. But the FEV lab was in bioscience, which means he should be wearing a green lab coat. But what complicates this even further is that when he was in his super mutant form, he was wearing a red lab coat. This is clearly the lab coat he was wearing when he transformed into a super mutant, which means when he was working in the FEV lab, he was wearing the red lab coat from the robotics division. And remember, when we explored the FEV lab, we found black lab coats in all of the lockers. Now, this is either an oversight on the developer's part, or we have to piece some things together. Here's my best attempt. When they first started experimenting with FEV, the FEV department was part of the bioscience division, because FEV is a virus, dealing with it is dealing with biological science. But then they discovered that they could use it to perfect humanity's genetic code, and they started to kidnap people from the Commonwealth and experiment on them with FEV to try and perfect humanity. The Institute then created a new branch, separate from bioscience, to oversee the FEV experiments. This branch eventually became the Synth Retention Bureau. Perhaps before there were synths to retain, Synth Retention was in charge of the FEV experiment, which is why Dr. Zimmer was ordering experiments, and we found the black lab coats in the FEV lab. This might actually make sense because remember, they were kidnapping people from the Commonwealth for a long time before they invented the synth, which means they couldn't send synths topside to kidnap people before they had created synths, which means they had to have a department of the Institute whose job it was to go topside and get people for the FEV experiment. That group of people may have been under Dr. Zimmer and have worn the black lab coats. But then they got the pre-war unspoiled genetic sample they needed from baby Sean. They spun off the synth program from the FEV program, which found success under the robotics program. Once synths started to escape, Dr. Zimmer and his team transitioned from overseeing the FEV lab into synth retention. And then the FEV lab fell under the administration of robotics, which is why he was wearing a red lab coat when he transformed. But then why in his human form was he wearing a blue lab coat? Well, we remember that the only other person in the Institute who seemed to be at all interested in what happened to Virgil is Madison Lee. She's the only one who has any curiosity about what happened in the FEV lab. It's possible that this blue lab coat he wears after he transforms back is evidence that at one point he used to work in advanced systems. Perhaps he was a close colleague of Madison Lee before he was transferred to the robotics department and the FEV lab. With his red lab coat from robotics destroyed, the only clothes he had left was his old advanced systems lab coat, which he changed into when he got back into his human form. Now, Virgil's ability to cure FEV could potentially have caused a lore problem for the greater Fallout universe, but I think they did a really good job of explaining that away here. We have learned time and time again in practically every Fallout game that FEV is incurable. Everyone who's ever tried to cure FEV has failed. But here, Brian Virgil, a solitary Institute scientist, succeeds. And not only that, but he has high hopes that he can produce an antidote to FEV in a cave with very little lab equipment, all by himself. It's unrealistic that he could cure FEV by himself, but he takes great pains to inform us that this cure is just for the one strain developed by the Institute that he was experimenting with. And we recall that there are many different strains to FEV. The super mutants in Fallout 1 were infected with the Mariposa strain of FEV, the strain that came from the Mariposa military base, the one that only the Master tinkered with. The Capital Wasteland super mutants were infected with the Vault 87 strain of FEV. The super mutants in West Virginia were infected with the West Tech strain of FEV that had itself undergone many different iterations before West Tech decided to test it on the people of Huntersville. And even here in the Institute, this strain had undergone many different iterations over 100 years of experimentation. This quest shows us that curing FEV is theoretically possible, but a new cure would have to be developed for each and every strain that exists in the Fallout universe. A daunting task for anyone, or any organization. But this is not the last we'll hear from Brian Virgil. We'll interact with him again when we work with the Brotherhood. But for now, we need to head back to the Institute to see if there are any other projects that the Institute scientists have for us. And we'll pick up right here where we leave off in my next episode. I publish new Fallout videos each and every week on my channel, so if you don't want to miss that episode, be sure to subscribe and to click that bell notification button. If you like this series and you want to show your support, go ahead and throw me a super thanks here on YouTube. Your super thanks directly contribute to the production of this series. I've got a shirt shop with completely unique designs that you can't find anywhere else. My designs come on other products as well, such as smartphone cases, pillows, posters, mugs, stickers, prints, etc. So if interested, you can find a link to my shop in the description below, or you can click here. If you like what I do, consider becoming a patron on Patreon or a member here on YouTube. YouTube members get little badges that appear next to their names in the comment sections of my videos and access to Ox emojis that they can use in my video comments and in the live chats of my live streams. But more than anything, I'm just so glad you're here watching this video with me today. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you soon with the next episode in the full story of Fallout 4.